The bar was loud, red lights casting shadows on the wooden floor. In the corner, Aria Quinn, a powerful young CEO, sipped her third whiskey, eyes tired and distant. Three men approached, smirking. "All alone? Pretty thing like you." Aria frowned, tried to stand but swayed slightly. Just then, a man in a cheap jacket, Caleb Ortiz, single dad, set down his lime soda and stepped between them. He said calmly, "She's not alone. Find another seat." The air froze. The group backed away. Aria looked up, saw his eyes. No fear, just quiet strength like a wall. The next night she returned, unable to forget the stranger. Caleb Ortiz was 35 years old, a single father who had once studied mechanical engineering, but dropped out after his wife passed away. Now he worked as a night shift line cook and part-time janitor, making ends meet in a world that seemed designed to break people like him. He lived simply with his 7-year-old son Leo in a small apartment where every dollar was counted twice. Each night after his shift, Caleb would stop by Murphy's bar for exactly one lime soda. Not because he couldn't afford alcohol, but because he had made himself a promise. While he sat there, he would fold napkins into paper cranes, carrying them home in his jacket pocket like tiny messengers of hope. It was a ritual that kept him sane. The quiet minutes at the bar, the methodical folding, the thought of Leo's face when he discovered a new crane on his nightstand. Small acts of love in a life that had been stripped of everything grand. Aria Quinn was 33 years old, CEO of a major logistics corporation that employed over 5,000 people. The business magazines called her the Iron Woman, praising her ruthless efficiency and strategic brilliance. But the truth was simpler and more painful. She was exhausted, isolated, drowning in stockholder pressure, and haunted by memories of her ex-fiancé's betrayal. Success had cost her everything that mattered. Friends, family, the ability to trust another human being. She worked 16-hour days not because she loved the work, but because silence was too dangerous. In silence, she remembered what she had lost. That night after a particularly brutal board meeting where her own executives had questioned her leadership, Aria found herself at Murphy's bar. It wasn't the kind of place CEOs usually frequented, which was exactly why she chose it. She wanted to disappear, to drink whiskey until the numbers stopped dancing in her head. She was on her third double when trouble found her. Three men, emboldened by alcohol and the late hour, approached her table with the swagger of predators who had cornered easy prey. Their words were slurred, their intentions clear. "All alone, beautiful? Let us keep you company." Aria felt the familiar rage rise in her chest, but alcohol had dulled her reflexes. When she tried to stand, the room tilted sideways. She was vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since childhood, and these men sensed it. That's when Caleb moved. He didn't rush or shout. He simply set down his lime soda with the deliberate care of a man who had learned that small actions could have large consequences. He stepped between Aria and the men, his presence filling the space like a quiet storm. "She's not alone," he said, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from years of protecting someone smaller and more precious than himself. "Find another seat." The men looked at Caleb's worn jacket, his calloused hands, his tired eyes. They saw a working-class guy who probably couldn't afford to replace a broken nose, but something in his stillness made them recalculate. This wasn't a man looking for a fight. This was a man prepared to end one. They muttered curses and moved away, their bravado evaporating like steam. Aria stared up at her unexpected protector, seeing something she hadn't encountered in years. His eyes held no fear, no calculation, no hidden agenda. Just quiet strength and the simple decision to do what was right. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice smaller than she had heard it in decades. Caleb nodded and started to return to his seat, but paused. He pulled a small paper crane from his pocket and placed it gently on her table. "Keep it," he said softly. "Maybe it'll help you sleep easier." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving only the memory of unexpected kindness and a perfect origami crane that seemed to glow under the bar's dim lights. That night, Aria carried the crane home in her trembling hands, unable to explain why it felt like the most valuable thing she owned. At home, Caleb placed an extra crane beside Leo's pillow, whispering, "Tonight there's a new friend watching over your dreams, buddy." The next day, Aria was trapped in a series of high-stakes meetings where every decision carried million-dollar consequences. Her assistant brought coffee every hour, her executives presented endless PowerPoints, and her phone buzzed with messages from investors who measured her worth in quarterly profits. But when she opened her wallet to pay for lunch, her fingers brushed against the paper crane. Suddenly, she was back in that bar, remembering what it felt like to be protected rather than protected from. The memory was so vivid, she could still smell the lime from Caleb's soda, still hear the quiet strength in his voice. That night, she returned to Murphy's bar. She told herself it was coincidence, that she just needed a drink after another brutal day. But her heart knew better. She was looking for something she hadn't realized she'd lost. The feeling of being seen as a person rather than a position. Caleb was there, sitting in the same spot, nursing the same lime soda. He looked up when she approached, showing no surprise, as if he had been expecting her. "Last night," she began, settling into the adjacent stool. "I didn't get your name." "Caleb," he replied simply. "Aria." They didn't talk much that second night. They just sat in comfortable silence, listening to rain drum against the windows while the bar's usual chaos swirled around them like a distant storm. In that bubble of quiet, Aria felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. Before leaving, Caleb folded another crane from a cocktail napkin and slid it across to her. "For the collection," he said with the hint of a smile. For the first time in months, Aria laughed. A real laugh that started deep in her chest and bubbled up like spring water. She tucked the crane into her wallet next to the first one, already imagining them as tiny guardians protecting her credit cards and business cards. Over the following weeks, Murphy's bar became their unspoken meeting place. Aria would finish her executive duties and find herself drawn to that corner table, where Caleb would be waiting with his lime soda in patient silence. Gradually, their conversations deepened. Aria began sharing fragments of her exhaustion, the feeling of being isolated at the top of her own company, the weight of decisions that affected thousands of jobs, the loneliness of success that nobody dared acknowledge. Caleb talked about Leo, about working 2 jobs to keep their heads above water, about the nightly ritual of folding paper cranes so his son would believe that every night friends are watching over your dreams. His stories painted pictures of a life so different from hers that they might as well have lived on different planets. But somehow in the space between their words, they found common ground in their shared understanding of responsibility and sacrifice. One evening, Aria asked the question that had been haunting her. "Why did you help me that first night? You didn't know me. I could have been anyone." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, folding a crane with the unconscious precision of thousands of repetitions. "Because," he finally said, "I never want my son to grow up thinking it's okay to watch someone get hurt when you can help them, especially not a woman, the kind of man I want Leo to become." That man steps up. The simple honesty of his answer hit Aria like a physical blow. In her world of corporate manipulation and strategic positioning, she had forgotten that some people acted from genuine principle rather than calculated advantage. She studied his face in the dim bar light, seeing the exhaustion lines around his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the way his cheap jacket was carefully maintained despite its age. This was a man who had been broken by life but had chosen to remain kind. The contrast with her own cynicism was stark and humbling. "Your son is lucky," she said quietly. "I hope so. I'm doing the best I can." That night, when Caleb showed her a photo of Leo grinning beside a small army of paper cranes arranged on his bedspread, Aria touched the phone screen with unexpected tenderness. The child's joy was infectious, his trust in his father's nightly ritual absolute. For a moment, Aria allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to be part of something that's simple and pure, to be valued not for her strategic mind or her ability to increase shareholder value, but simply for showing up with care and consistency. The image stayed with her through the sleepless hours that followed, a warmth in her chest that felt suspiciously like hope. As weeks passed, their friendship deepened in ways neither had expected. Caleb began sharing stories of his wife, how she had died in a car accident when Leo was only 3, how he had nearly broken under the weight of single parenthood, how folding cranes had started as a way to keep his hands busy during the darkest nights. Aria found herself talking about her ex-fiancé Evan, about how his betrayal had taught her to view every relationship as a potential threat to her company. She described the loneliness of success, the way people either wanted something from her or were intimidated by what she represented. In the safe space of Murphy's bar, surrounded by the gentle ritual of lime sodas and paper cranes, two wounded people began the careful process of learning to trust again. Neither realized they were falling in love. They only knew that the hour they spent together each night had become the part of their day they most looked forward to, the moment when they could stop performing their respective roles and simply exist as themselves. But in a city where business and personal lives collided with brutal regularity, their quiet sanctuary was about to be discovered. The rumors started small, as they always do in the interconnected world of corporate power. A junior executive mentioned seeing their CEO at a dive bar with some guy. A photographer from a gossip blog happened to be in the area and snapped a grainy photo through Murphy's window. Within days, the whispers had grown into headlines. The business tabloids, always hungry for stories about powerful women showing weakness, pounced on the narrative with vicious glee. Iron Woman loses control? And CEO's mystery man, gold digger or genuine? Aria watched her carefully constructed reputation crumble in real time. Board members who had once feared her now exchanged meaningful looks during meetings. Her assistant fielded calls from reporters asking pointed questions about her fitness to lead and whether her erratic behavior indicated deeper problems. The attacks were personal and professional, designed to strip away everything she had built. But the cruelest cut came from someone she had once trusted. Evan Vale, her former CFO and ex-fiancé, appeared at Murphy's bar on a Thursday night like a ghost from a life she had tried to forget. He was perfectly dressed as always, his suit probably costing more than Caleb made in a month. "So this is how you rebuild your image?" Evan said, sliding uninvited into the booth across from her. His voice carried that familiar mixture of concern and condescension that had once made her doubt her own instincts. Caleb was at the bar, ordering their usual drinks. He returned to find a stranger interrogating Aria with the casual cruelty of someone who knew exactly where her weaknesses lay. "And you must be the famous mystery man," Evan continued, looking Caleb up and down with the dismissive gaze of someone cataloging inferior merchandise. "Let me guess. Line cook? Construction worker? Whatever it is, you've certainly hit the lottery with this one." Caleb set the drinks down carefully, his movements controlled and deliberate. He didn't sit, didn't respond to the provocation. He simply stood beside Aria's chair like a silent guardian, his presence shifting the dynamic in the room. "He's nothing, Aria," Evan said, dropping his voice to the intimate tone he had once used to manipulate her decisions. "A distraction that's destroying everything you've worked for. Is this really worth throwing away your career?" For a moment, Aria felt the old, familiar tug of Evan's influence. He had always been brilliant at identifying her fears and using them as leverage. The rational part of her mind knew he was right. Being seen with Caleb was damaging her reputation in ways that might be irreparable. But then she looked up at Caleb, seeing the quiet dignity in his posture, remembering the way he had protected her without asking for anything in return. She thought about Leo's paper cranes, about nights spent in genuine conversation rather than strategic manipulation. "He's the first person in years who sees me as a human being instead of a corporate asset," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And if that threatens people like you, then maybe that's exactly what I need." Evan's facade cracked slightly, revealing the anger underneath. "You're making a mistake. Tomorrow morning, the board will hear about this. Your shareholders will lose confidence. Everything you've built will collapse because you got sentimental over a charity case." He stood to leave, then turned back with one final blow. "When this all falls apart, don't expect me to help you pick up the pieces. Some mistakes can't be undone." The next morning, Kara Williams, Aria's head of PR, entered her office with the grim expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "The board is meeting this afternoon," Kara announced without preamble. "The photos, the rumors, Evan's comments to the press, they're questioning your judgment. My recommendation is immediate damage control. Cut all contact with this Caleb person, issue a statement about temporary stress, maybe take a medical leave until this blows over." Aria stared out her office window at the city below, thinking about the choice that lay before her. On one side, the empire she had built, the power she wielded, the respect she commanded. On the other, a man who folded paper cranes for his son and asked for nothing more than her authentic presence. That evening she met Caleb at their usual spot. The bar felt different now, charged with the weight of impending loss. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice tight with unshed tears. "Being seen with you, it's destroying my career. The board, the investors, they're using you as evidence that I'm unfit to lead." Caleb listened without interrupting, his face revealing nothing of what he might be thinking. "If I stay close to you, I lose my position," she continued. "If I walk away, I keep my reputation intact. It's a simple calculation." "Sounds like you've already made your decision," he said quietly. "No," she said, surprised by the fierceness in her own voice. "No, I haven't. Because for the first time in years, I have to decide what I actually want, not what I think I should want." Caleb reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her manicured ones. "If staying close to me means losing everything fake in your life, then maybe those are things worth losing." The simple truth of his words broke something open inside her chest. For years, she had been afraid of appearing weak, of showing any crack in her armor. But sitting in that dim bar, holding hands with a man who worked 2 jobs and folded paper cranes, she felt stronger than she had in years. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "I don't know who I am without the company, without the power. What if I'm nothing without all of that?" "Then you'll figure out who you really are," Caleb said. "And maybe that person will be happier than the one who's sitting here crying over a job that's slowly killing her." That night, Aria went home to her empty penthouse and cried for the first time in years. Not from sadness, but from relief. The decision was made, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. At Caleb's apartment, Leo was drawing at the kitchen table, his tongue poking out in concentration. When his father asked what he was making, the boy held up a picture of 3 stick figures. A tall man, a shorter man, and a woman with long hair. Under the drawing, in his careful 7-year-old handwriting, he had written, "My team." Caleb stared at the drawing, understanding that his son had already accepted what the adult world was trying to tear apart. In Leo's innocent perspective, love was simple. You drew the people who mattered, and you called them your team. The transformation began with small rebellions against the life that had been slowly suffocating her. Aria started turning off her phone at 6 p.m., following Caleb's gentle suggestion to take 10 minutes of silence each evening. At first, the quiet was unbearable. Her mind raced with unfinished tasks, pending decisions, and worst-case scenarios. But gradually, she learned to breathe through the anxiety, to let her thoughts settle like sediment in still water. She bought a small basil plant for her office windowsill, remembering Caleb's observation that small things last longer than contracts. Her executive team thought it was an odd addition to her sterile office environment. But Aria found herself talking to the plant during particularly stressful moments, watching its leaves turn toward the light with determined optimism. The changes weren't just personal. Aria began restructuring her schedule, blocking out time for actual meals instead of protein bars grabbed between meetings. She instituted a no weekend emails policy for her department, shocking employees who had grown accustomed to her 24/7 availability. When questioned about these changes, she gave the same answer. "I'm not a machine, and neither are any of you." Meanwhile, Caleb was making adjustments of his own. He negotiated with his supervisor to ensure he could be home by 7 p.m. every night, prioritizing Leo's bedtime routine over overtime pay. The financial hit was significant, but watching his son's face light up when he walked through the door made every sacrificed dollar worthwhile. Their evening routine became sacred. Dinner together in their small kitchen, homework at the table while Caleb prepared lunch for the next day, and always the folding of paper cranes while Leo told stories about his day at school. One evening, Aria appeared at their apartment door carrying a homemade cake that listed slightly to one side. "I thought maybe Leo might like to learn how to fold cranes," she said, holding up the lopsided dessert like an offering. Leo's shriek of delight could probably be heard 3 floors down. He had been asking about Daddy's friend from the pictures for weeks, and suddenly she was real, standing in their kitchen with cake and the promise of origami lessons. The three of them spent the evening at the small dining table, surrounded by the debris of cake crumbs and failed paper attempts. Aria's first crane looked more like a wounded butterfly, but Leo applauded as if she had created a masterpiece. "You're getting better," he announced with 7-year-old authority. "Daddy says practice makes perfect, but I think practice makes happy." Aria looked around the tiny kitchen, taking in the mismatched furniture, the drawings taped to the refrigerator, the comfortable chaos of a life lived fully. The contrast with her sterile penthouse was stark, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. At work, the changes in Aria's behavior were causing ripples throughout the company. Some board members grumbled about her new boundaries, but employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements. People were working more efficiently, calling in sick less frequently, and actually using their vacation time. When corporate headhunters called with offers from competing firms, Aria's staff declined at higher rates than ever before. They were discovering what she had learned, that human beings perform better when treated like human beings rather than productivity units. Still, the gossip and speculation continued. Aria faced whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, pointed questions during board meetings about her commitment to the company, and thinly veiled threats about investor confidence. Her response surprised everyone, including herself. During a particularly aggressive board meeting, when Evan Vale questioned her fitness to lead, Aria stood up and addressed the room with calm authority. "I am not a machine. I am not emotionless. And I will not apologize for discovering that I'm a human being with human needs. If that makes you uncomfortable, then perhaps you need to examine why basic humanity threatens you." The room fell silent. Several board members looked uncomfortable, caught between their desire to maintain control and their inability to argue against her fundamental point. Outside the boardroom, Caleb waited in the lobby, having taken time off work to provide moral support. When Aria emerged, she was smiling for the first time in weeks. "How did it go?" he asked. "I told them the truth," she said, "that I'm not sorry for being human." That evening, they returned to Murphy's bar not to hide, but to celebrate. The bartender, who had been watching their relationship develop over months, set out their usual drinks without being asked: whiskey with lime for Aria, lime soda for Caleb. They sat in comfortable companionship, folding cranes from cocktail napkins, while the bar's usual chaos swirled around them. Two people who had learned that the most radical thing they could do was simply be themselves, without apology or explanation. Aria carried Leo's drawing in her notebook now, the stick figures labeled "My Team," serving as a reminder that family wasn't defined by blood or law, but by the choice to show up for each other day after day. The corporate world could keep its power games and strategic manipulations. She had found something infinitely more valuable, a place where she was wanted not for what she could do, but for who she was. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning that smelled like fresh coffee and possibility, Aria appeared at Caleb and Leo's apartment carrying another basil plant. This one was healthier than her first attempt, its leaves bright green and reaching confidently toward the light. Leo immediately ran to get labels from his art supplies, carefully writing Aria's plant in his determined 7-year-old handwriting and sticking it to the small terracotta pot. On the refrigerator, Aria noticed a new drawing had joined Leo's growing gallery. This one showed 3 figures flying a kite together, with paper cranes soaring alongside the sun in a bright blue sky. The detail that made her breath catch was the way Leo had drawn them. Not as separate people sharing space, but as a unit, their stick figure hands connected in an unbroken chain. "If you and Dad still need me," Aria said quietly, touching the edge of the drawing, "I'd like to stay." Caleb smiled, the expression transforming his tired face into something radiant. "Welcome home," he said simply. That morning, their small kitchen was filled with golden sunlight streaming through windows that desperately needed washing. Paper cranes lined the windowsill like tiny sentries. Basil plants sat proudly on the counter, and the smell of pancakes mixed with the sound of Leo's laughter as he tried to flip one without making a mess. It was chaos, and it was perfect. Aria sent a brief email to her PR director. "Effective immediately, I will be leaving the office at 6 p.m. every day. Anyone requiring meetings can schedule them during business hours." There was no corporate speak, no strategic positioning, Just a simple statement of her new priorities. The business world didn't end. Stock prices didn't collapse. The company continued to function with the revolutionary discovery that their CEO was more effective when she wasn't working herself to exhaustion. Some investors grumbled. Some board members made veiled threats. But Aria had discovered something more valuable than their approval. The knowledge that she could walk away from it all and still be whole. That evening, they returned to Murphy's bar one final time. Not as refugees seeking shelter, but as a family celebrating where they began. The bartender, now accustomed to their routine, placed 2 glasses on the bar, whiskey with lime, lime soda, and a small glass of apple juice for Leo, who had been deemed old enough to join their Saturday evening tradition. Caleb and Aria each folded a crane from cocktail napkins, placing them side by side on the bar. The paper birds sat together like a promise, their wings touching in eternal connection. "Now we have a collection everywhere," Leo announced, pointing to the cranes on the bar. The ones lining their kitchen window, the special ones tucked in Aria's wallet, and the dozens that watched over his bedroom each night. The next morning, as sunlight painted their small kitchen in shades of gold and amber, Leo came running from his room carrying a slightly crooked crane he had folded all by himself. He placed it carefully on the windowsill between his father's precise creations and Aria's improving attempts. "Now we are complete," he declared with the absolute certainty of a child who understood love in its purest form. Aria looked around the kitchen, taking in the mismatched furniture, the drawings covering every available surface, the plants growing enthusiastically toward the light, and the 2 people who had taught her that home wasn't a place you owned, but a feeling you created together. Outside, the city rushed past with its endless demands and strategic complications. But inside their small kitchen, surrounded by paper cranes and the smell of growing things, 3 people who had chosen each other sat down to breakfast, complete at last. The corporate world had taught her to value what she could acquire. This small family had taught her to treasure what she could give. And for the first time in her adult life, Aria Quinn was exactly where she belonged. If you believe that sometimes strangers can become family, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Heart Stories. We tell the stories the world often forgets, so every heart can find where it belongs.